I mean, you can vote him. Where is it?
No, but when?
Here.
Yeah, when's their election? All right.
19. Oh, we can start voting on 19.
Yeah, I actually can
The Bhagavan was dwelling on Massive Voltage Mountain in Russia, Korea, together with a great community of monks and a great community of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of the non-profound perception. Also, at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Ishvara looked upon the very
practice of the fine perfection of wisdom, and we have those valuing the responsibility of and through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable share which is in this Aya Vishnu. Rashid and the son of the lineage trained and wishes to practice to obtain he said that the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aya Vishnu suggested the Venerable Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon and make this correctly and repeatedly, holding those 5 attributes also as empty inherent nature. Form is empty and emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other. Is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, creative combination, composition, factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra likewise all phenomena are emptiness without characteristic. Hence they sustaineth not without staying, not deficient, not fulfilled. In emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition of factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of fashion, no phenomenon. There is no I element and so on, including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, including no aging and death, no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no self-origination, cessation, and harm. There is no field of wisdom, no attainment, and also no knowledge. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas perfection of wisdom, without obscuration and without all the Buddhas in the world in the 3 times also manifestly completely awakened to us are possible and complete enlightenment. We realize the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the matter of the perfection of wisdom and matter of great knowledge, the unsurpassed matter, the matter equal to the unequal, the matter that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as truth since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Kayaka Om Gati Gati Padagati Palasangati Bodhisattva. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, training in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration, committed to Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aya Avalokiteshvara, was said, son, indeed it is like that, it is like that. One should practice profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated ability. The Bhagavan had not spoken in the word
when those around him in their entirety around the world, God, Jesus, heroes, men, and others, were overjoyed and highly praised and spoken by Bhagavan. I prostrated gathering of the Dakinis in the three chakras, for the wide and holy yoga of peace in space. By your powers, by your words of magical animation, look after the practitioners like a mother to the child. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power to make inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified, Chitta glorious soul. May all negative forces opposed to the Dharma be pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. And may all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Saji Kukijin Metal Drum, Viran Chini Degen Pati, Sangeshin Turi Teo Kokunanda Shima Chupa Shu Guru Rama
Sangye Chedan Sati Chama Chanchu Bhakti Dhammi Kemsunji Bhakti Chishini Soma Galam Peshe Sangye Dhubara Shu Sangye Chedan Sati Chama Chanchu Bhakti Dhammi Kemsunji Bhakti Chishini Soma Galam Peshe Sangye Dhubara Shu Sangye Chedan Soti Chomula Chanchu Bhakti Dhammi Kemsunji Bhakti Chishini Soma Galam Peshe Sangye Dhubara Shu Kanki tuzi nizune tawa tamji bombi che tambi chun dunze kodung che la chanse lo.
Very delicious tea. No, it's getting better and better. Maybe one day it will become coffee.
Deep. Malam.
Yeah.
Malam. Cousin T. Zu Namgurtang, Yang Geba Gabanis, Zu Shija Kandurtang, Daji Sawa, Taba Kaimba. Tini Dami Jonsha, Chetu Samson Jome, Majipan, Temen, Tiziki on the vacance.
So, we started to look at a section of cultivating the patience that is intent on Dhamma. In the extensive explanation, we finished looking at point A, and now we're looking at point B that comes out of the heading of refuting existence of independent causes. First off, refuting the independent self and principle of the Samkhyas. Now, the first point, which we studied yesterday, comes out of the heading of refuting but the principle generates independent expressions or manifestations. So let's read through the 6 lines that this section covers. That which is asserted as the principle and that which is imputed as the self do not arise after having purposefully thought I shall arise. If they are not produced and non-existent, what is asserted to be produced at that time?
제다디 대가든 시바나 징기디 피기 종에게 원에게 지 가르송도 여버디 세우지 마셔디 식디 제와자야 카부펜도스 차쿠펜도스 라.
We have here a position that is being contested, and without understanding what is it that the other party is saying, it'd be difficult to make sense of what Shantideva says here in addressing that position.
이내다 디 츠간 당부니디 수 시작 강도던 다치자와 딱바 강인바세디 다치 딱바 강인바세디 이게 대충이 되버스는 분도 지금 쩨범만 급이기 소차결에스라.
In the first 2 lines in verse 27, it says, that which is asserted as the principle, and that which is imputed as the self. So these are 2 topics which are imputed in a certain fashion by the other party in that debate. Right? So we have a certain position, that of the Samkhya's, and they come up with that concept of principle and the self.
레직즈나 총액 되수디 ngali keranzo gutsu ya tindi yobaina ani samzu tenro chis ro ineya ta zu dinanglo ya segan thambuni dige zu singi di kharsun gor slandi tadru mawachi gi ani chizo singi di manzu nambe gi ani pi dedu gi che khanda jin baina ya ani lela ten chongba res soma nanshingi chonga digi ani jigdingi jig lu longju tamje di ani chitsuwi gi söbata uchik ro chebabu chitsuwi gi ma kodik cheshawe sora chik sungu yosares ro.
So we address a certain position of someone else. So they have that imputation or that concept of a general principle, right? So we call it either the principle or a general principle and the self. Now it's hard to understand what this school of thought is asserting with respect to these 2. So if you guys have a better understanding of that you can share, that's good. But it seems that first off, with respect to the general principle, the general principle, according to this particular school of thought, is responsible for happiness and suffering. So according to our school of thought or our tradition, happiness and suffering are created by karma, right? According to that school of thought, when we look at the world, when we look at our body, when we look at possessions and so forth, they are created by the general principle.
Teni dachi jawa se tsikani badigi tanganzugi nga se jawas da nga se gi ani di ngunzin cheondigi ta taduma mampu jigi ta susuzugi namju thoni samlu tani ginseng ton chebe ton da ngunzi chedang manda yungu yoras ineya sanji chomden digi ani dadi khandachila ngunzi chewa di tanganzu namju shedeyagi ani ngasi bigilaya dajila ten takpat samji ma topigi yudini ani ngasi ngi zuchu samede wachi tindi song digi ta ani didam mentin bigi ani tadruma su rajigin bayna ta digi gaksho so chago ras inza da gaksho nang zu ro di tanda ani chitsu ndengi ani tamche di pigige kewchigi söbar se kewdu ngunzun digi ani da shirik tagba se chik ani chidan ranjin pena da chik kaso da chik namri ki ranshin imba chila ya ani tagba indewa chik gyuwa tsaani droya meba chik o dindri chiki ani kodi chebabu dindri chila ya peshi dindri zora chila ya ta ngunzin chigyo res ra tisungo sa res.
So one term that is used by the opponent is the general principle, and as we said, they're responsible for different creations. Then another thing that they assert is a self, the self for I, me. Different schools of thought, different philosophies try to come up with a definition of I or me. Also, in our tradition, the Buddha, the Bhagavan, explained what the I, the self, what me is. And he says that the I, the me, is that which is merely imputed and depends upon its basis of designation, the five aggregates. The self, I or me, self does not objectively exist. It is not an objectively existing self. So this is what we assert in our tradition. That was what the Buddha, the Bhagavan, taught. Now, in asserting that, we also refute the positions of others with respect to their presentation of the self, or their assertion with respect to what the self is. So the school of thought that asserts the general principle also asserts the self. What they say is that the self is a conscious being. It is a knowledge being, and that self is permanent, unchanging. This is what we refute here.
That dini dan jongshi se chidu samshin jongme magi pan temen tezike wan deba khans song di ta di garning sut di ani dichagi ores ra re dichagoras.
So in going back to the text, it says, that which is asserted as the principle and that which is imputed as the self by this school of thought. We say with respect to that, in refuting that notion, that they do not arise after having purposefully thought as shall arise. If they are not produced and non-existent, what is asserted to be produced at that time?
Tadi tindri da shiri kevutige ani jigding nilu lonjo tsamalo and dige tachi kochogi on tuba yimbaina and dindri da shiri kevutige ani rawang thoni ani tumba rebe kandas res lawandi tadige sam shendu rawang thoni ani kaso taji and dream mesibachik ra mesibachik rewas ra.
So this conscious being that is also responsible for different things in the world. The question is, are they born independently? Are they born intentionally, thinking, I shall arise? That's not possible.
Pena rajik masamba rawang thoni and jongsul ji mebadi chidan di khongya chik song sa yorwas ra masamba rawang thoni pena khondro sayatia ani rawang thoni khondro sam mesiwachi imbadi rangugi drdos tinaji chagoras ta masamba rawang thoni ani yula ani jutsu ji mebati review to gores choching ni 아니 그게 라왕 토니 아니 줌바지긴 바이나 상마치 귤 마치바 아니 지 메다 톤롤라 소베 바르레야 캬바탄 고야기 겐센식케 라비오 마라스로
So we have spoken about it before, in that can something be produced independently, without depending upon anything else, without thinking of production? We already said that that is not possible, in that we discussed that with respect to anger. So anger does not arise independently. We do not become angry without depending upon other factors. That is not possible. So this school of thought asserts that this conscious being exists independently and also as permanent phenomenon. If that is the case, why wouldn't that not be equal to other things like other living beings, animals, and other sentient beings alike?
다 마삼바 마이바데 그 개발해도지 라 배낭아주 규기 아니 제비추 칸도지메나 규도 개발했어야지 어딘나신기 아니 다 시리기 개부 따바란중기 개부디기 개발했을 라바이나 간두 차고레스 가른 간두 차고르세디 기 규기 제부디 아니 개바인 바치려야 개시기 규드 딱바치 샤바이나 아니 딱바치기 아니 제부 개바치 메시바지로 다들어 간지 규 tel야 교춘 드레밍이지기 아니 제분 교로 댕이지 아니 개수지 무비 쳐도 문토마치 차고레스 진짜 디오 메시바지레스.
So this conscious being is asserted to be permanent. Now we accept in our tradition the working of causality. Causes produce effects. Is it possible for a permanent cause to produce its effect? It's not possible for a permanent cause to produce an effect, because for a cause to produce a result, a transformation needs to occur. So a permanent cause cannot produce an effect because a permanent cause is not subject to transformation, to change. And therefore, going back again to the assertion with respect to a conscious being that is permanent and so forth, those permanent causes cannot produce their effects.
임발라야 기비 몽지 메나 디치 아니 최신 기바 데바디 아니 지금도 아저스 제 디치 기원 데바칸스.
As it says here, if they are not produced, they're non-existent. So for example, this conscious being is asserted to be permanent. If it is permanent, it is not produced. If it is not produced, then also production doesn't exist. So what is asserted to be produced at that time?
군이빠라리안 제어용 메시바지 제거해서 빼나 먼저 깨왕하시 좋은디게 조 남식 톰 남식 균 톰이 아니 깨왕하시 두고거라스 라 두고거라스 인지 딘자 남식 하마디 남식디 균 남식 하마지기 마키와 아니 수진지기 남식 치마지 키 시그마스 군이 베드링 문제 위치지 인자 그게 로스 말아. 진짜 남신 하마 징이벌 구도 슬라와. 디 떡이 아니 개왕 하마디 저 디떡이 두고르스. 디 남신 기타 지퍼디소 지퍼로지레스라. 뒤지기 취지래야. 규 두마시기 취지기 제분 뒤지기 취지. 키스기요 말이었어. 라디 모유네스 차데 와라스라.
A permanent cause cannot produce a result. So when we say that a permanent cause cannot produce a result, this is impossible. This is what we assert in our tradition. In the Buddhist tradition, it is not possible for a permanent cause to produce a result. So to explain it using an example. For example, in our tradition, we assert the existence of past and future lifetimes, and the assertion of past and future lifetimes is based on the primary consciousness, the continuity of consciousness. And the consciousness is not produced by a mother and father. The consciousness is not produced by material things or physical phenomena. The consciousness is produced from a previous or prior moment of consciousness, and on that basis, the continuity of past and future lifetime is certain, which means that this presentation is based on compounded phenomena, as causes producing compounded phenomena as results. It is not possible for uncompounded phenomena to produce compounded phenomena.
제 초직니 다다 시리기 깨우신 디 아니 탐질로 아니 중인 다 탐질에 캡딩인 아니 두마치 주직 시작이야 봐나 다 남칸한신 차도 그러스 라 남칸한신 두마치 남칸다 우치 아니 펜누기 아니 자와디 가야 아니 재미스 거레스 라
근데 시리기 개월락이야 아무나 지소
시리기 깨우 다 딱봐 시리기 깨우
So if the conscious being is asserted with respect to everything, in that it pervades everything, it would become like space, and as such, it would not be able to function.
Tindro resda tangi abuji hako mes tadini man jawad lo shagin sirwa.
Anyway, this position is not very clear, and Geshe said that he doesn't understand it very well. So maybe let's look at the commentary and see what it says.
Tad dumin hintov sums, tad dumin hintov sayati, and chizu gitachi kechu sort of share that. And this sungar, tad dumin hintov sum chanyam bala, singing adingi zotans, ti namgirki dubi, never saw Raman to keto sheshava, kang debatans. Shirigi kevula dachi tani yula rawan to launchaba taba kainbati miriba tas datan zo tingi rani rawan du yunyongatan namgir kibi chudun jonga shi chetu samshin jonga mela chawachi minibi rung radu tsombi cheros Jebu kiba thi zo telin jebu kiba deba kainbati miriba to zo tingi maki bisha kanji takba yin bisha setiri kyaba da rangi maki na jebu kiba ti met na te maybe captures.
Consider the dual subject. When it says the dual subject, it refers to two things: the primary principle and the conscious self. So there are two things here, right? The principle and the self. So consider these two. So first off, the primary principle possessing 5 characteristics, which is an equilibrium of particle, darkness, and courage, as well as the harms that are contained in its expressions. It follows, so this is with respect to the general principle. So it follows, it is unsuitable to say that they are generated independently, because this very particle is like the horns of rabbit that cannot perform actions. It does not arise volitionally, thinking I shall arise to generate an independent expression. Now, with respect to the second subject, which is the conscious being or the self, consider the subject, the self, that is imputed on the knowledge person. It follows that it is unsuitable to say that it engages objects independently, because this very self is like the horns of a rabbit that cannot perform actions. It does not arise volitionally, thinking I shall arise to generate the independent experience of the object. It follows it is unsuitable to assert that at the time of the generation of the result, a result is generated from the principle. Geshe says that because essentially it is permanent. So since the principle, this general principle, is permanent, it is unsuitable to assert that at the time of the generation of the result, a result is generated from it, because the principle itself is not generated. It is permanent. Therefore, there is a pervasion, because if oneself is not generated and one cannot generate a result, there is then a pervasion that one cannot generate a result.
Niba da shirigi kevu yulla rawan de lonchoba gabanes re tindita tabaranjung kevu di yulla rawan de lonchoba gabanes yulla tadu ingebe gaban giva mainos.
So there's another point that is refuted with respect to the position of this school of thought. And this position is that refuting that an aware being autonomously experiences objects. So the Samkhya schools asserts a person that arises from themselves. There are self-arising phenomenon. That person is also permanent. So that being the case, Shantideva says that it refutes an aware being autonomously experiencing objects. Looking at the last two lines in verse 28, it says, since it would always be distracted to its objects, it follows that it will never cease.
Yul minzin bi tüm misigwa chagogwas right.
I'm looking for this. Does the knowledge person cease when it does not engage objects? It follows it does not, because it is accepted to be permanent functionality, and if it is that, then it will always be distracted by objects, because there will be no time when it's not apprehending objects.
Da sucientan tangu sundechi ti neba kebaso keban detos ti neba so keban detos.
So we first of all dealt with the position of the Samkhya's, refuting the independent self and the principle of the Samkhya's. Let's look at the second refutation of another non-Buddhist school of thought, which is called the Nyayas, or the Nyayika. In refuting the independent self that is asserted by the Nyayika, there are three main points. Let's look at them. It is not valid to posit that a permanent phenomenon produces an effect. It is not valid for a permanent phenomenon to rely upon conditions, and permanent phenomena are not related to conditions. Things first, let's look at Geta Dhammarincha's commentary, which begins with the assertions of the Nyayika. So the Nyayika assert a self that has form and is a permanent functionality, and they say that it creates harm. this is what they assert, right? So they assert a self that has a form, is permanent functionality, and it creates harm.
Jide date tanani kashin cheba mebangus. Debe nalaya jide da tangu yinani dimaji yi nankashin du debi kibi cheba mebangus savar talos.
If the self were permanent, it would obviously be devoid of activity, just like space. It would not be possible for it to function. So the commentary to that says, however, it is very clear that if such a self is a permanent functionality, then similar to non-compounded space, it cannot produce a result.
Je kanji dodo di da dinji gi da tagwachi any tamji any junginji shabayina any gandun do sirwa gandun do sewarta kansin any jebun dushi gi chu any gyu ranjin che mamuji yabani any gandu mig ngosum tonde yachi and di keba bo any pi zo da tini any tagba ranjung gi kewchi shabayina any gyudan jevi paraliya java khaya mingi ki ani gyuti jevi de kiba res lab go yala sobata kanjin gandu mamu shujing dos tinza kerang da tagba and dindi shadi khane sam ta na ya ani karsu ta chi gandu chag dos ro dodo teresta.
In short, compounded phenomena which are produced are results and also are in the nature of causes. If you assert that a certain result is produced by a permanent phenomenon, which is a self-arising phenomenon, you have an internal contradiction in your assertion, because you're asserting that the cause is unrelated to a result. A permanent cause cannot produce a result because it would be unrelated to it. And if you do maintain that a result is produced by a cause that is unrelated to it, a permanent cause, then you would end up with that contradiction of everything can be produced by anything.
Ta dini tila warda ta khorang ngung takba yinaya ani jebi ki vikaliya ko kenji da techini ani jebi ki chogra sayo sorachi ro len dinji ji da legu dos ta dinji ji leba yina ani dian tegmudus kyan teba meteban said odila wars ro.
So this school of thought asserts a permanent cause that produces a result. We said that that's not possible. But they say, hold on. It is permanent, but when it encounters conditions, it produces. It can produce because when it encounters conditions, it depends upon these conditions, production occurs. To that, we say that it is not possible. So let's look at the next point in the outline. It is not valid for a permanent phenomenon to rely upon conditions.
The deeper this troops is a pena, Nanzu Gu Kandajin by Naya, Jebiki Vikalaya, Gukoran Chipu, Tony, Jebiki 2 Yomaros, Ra, Tidanyam the Kenji Toki, any Gutigi, Jebiki Kudas, Pena, Medog 7 Tavitigi, 7 Koran Chipu Jigi, any meadow, Jebu metal key 2 mothers, that Jane Chulula soba, trailer soba, Timti, soba lateni, and 7 digi. Jebu medo kigoras the dig sorich ra da tagba khoran ngon tagba yinaya ko kyen da chechini ani nganzu ta chi kasota nelu lonje samolo ani di ke bare ro chi labaina ko kyen da che sadi namja de tegmundos.
Before we get into the refutation that Shantideva formulates here, let's just add some more details with respect to cause and effect as we understand them in our tradition. So in our tradition, we say that results are produced by causes, right? A result is produced by a cause, but it's not enough for just one cause in order to produce an effect. There also need to be conditions that come together with the cause in order to produce an effect. Like, for example, if you consider a flower arises from its cause, a seed, but just having a seed alone is not sufficient. You also need to provide the seed with conducive or cooperative conditions. You need water and food and warmth and so forth in order for the seed to germinate and to grow into a flower. So similarly, when we look at other causes and results, a cause alone cannot produce its effect. It also needs conditions to come together with a cause in order to produce an effect. So going back to what the Nyayakas assert, they assert that the cause is permanent, but depending upon certain conditions that come together, it produces an effect. So Shantideva comes back to this position and says that although you assert that, it is not possible for a permanent thing to depend upon conditions.
제 데디 겐가 되고 메데바니스 랑긴 모 따장스 다시리 게버디 코 겐들 첸니 제비게 첸나스 디 용에메바디 겐놈 셴단 첸나양스 교와 메라 지체리에 제비티양 군신나 제비들 지식자스.
So let's look at how we address this point. So it begins with an argument in the commentary. Although its nature is permanent, if this self meets with conditions, then it can produce a result. To that, Shantideva says, although conditions meet, how can they affect the unchanging? If it is like before during the action, what did the action do to it?
대다딘 제베나운 시위어스라 제베나운로야 딱바 깬데 제바 미식징스 소이들이 딱바 깬데 제바 미식 디 균생 카르레스 라그러다 딱바 깬데 제바 미식 균생 카르레스 라운디 켓시 깬데 제바 지요나 아니 교버드로야 지요고거레스 깬데 제비 고든디 교버드로야드레스라 아니 딱바는 교버드로면서 그 깬데 제시고 말았어.
The position here is that it is not possible for a permanent phenomenon to depend upon conditions. It is not possible for a permanent phenomenon to depend upon conditions because the meaning of depending upon conditions is that when conditions are met, a transformation occurs. That is the meaning of meeting up with conditions. Since a permanent phenomenon does not undergo transformation, then it is impossible for it to change when encountering conditions, and therefore it does not depend upon conditions.
And the Turkey data battalion, Jodro Mevitchers, Jodro Mevitchers, Dad Joe Mevitchers. Kavata Gengi Pemba Chibitsi, Yang, Dad and Joe Mikibi, Tuki, Hungi Ranshili, Mandebius. Nemananshin, they were the Kutabanza. Tell him Mandena, Pemba Chibi, Dad and Chishi Yodi, Kavachon Yang, Michivichers.
Let's look at the answer that Geshe Rinchen formulates on the basis of Shantideva's verse. It is impossible for a permanent phenomenon to meet with conditions. Although the conditions of striving and so forth meet with the other conditions, how could these conditions affect the self? It follows they cannot affect the self because the self cannot change. It follows there is a perversion because when these conditions have an effect, this self will not have changed from before, from before the result was generated, and since it did not change, what effect did the conditions have on it? They did not change it in the slightest.
Sorry. Sumbas kendan deva mebanis. Ta tabadi tabaranjung kivudi kendan deva meba karesna ngon gyuvi pemba michikyan. Kenda deva yomares. Ta kenda deva yomares landi and ta su khala gore. Ta khurang ki da ngon chigbigi pemba michikyan pemba tenshin che yoris labaina. 대한 지금도 대 제번 딘 제번 기와 컨시어스
The next point in that section says that permanent phenomena are not related to conditions. Previously, we said that permanent phenomena do not rely upon conditions. Now we said permanent phenomena are not related to conditions. The commentary begins with an argument. If the self does not facilitate an action that is in its own nature, as this action is an entity different from the self. Tuda Shantideva says, these are its actions, you say, right? So the Nyayika say that these are the actions of this permanent self. How do they become related? To explain that, the answer says, this is also not valid, because if one says that the actions which creates the results of this self is of a different entity, then how does it become related to the self? It could not be related to the self by nature or cause.
di kandaroji sunguyores shubainasro te 제번 딘 신 제번 기와 컨시어스디 penanganzugi 남베기 다단 풍부님보디 라 ngongchik 되기어라스 다단 풍부님 ngongchik 차거디 다단 풍부님보디 아니 다 찜지킨 제와 추거레스 tinza nanzu phumbe lagbe chokse de la rebana nge chokse la reba insagi thanyi de jartu gores kasni khuni ani dewa tuyanza ani lagbe khang ani simbadi nge simbala ya jar chogores ta ani dar taban dengi dige ani phumbo da nimbodi jeme deji chawainza dinji namjan chisa yo mares dinza khugi ani chabashi dichesagi ani chawachi zawni ten yo mares taro.
So what does it mean? Well, we'll look at the last two lines in verse 30. If it is said, this is the activity of that, how could the two ever be related? So if you say that there is a permanent self, and the activities of the self bring about that change, well, how can the activities be related to a permanent self? In that, we define two modes of relationship. There is an intrinsic relationship, and there is a causal relationship between phenomena, right? So phenomena can, if they are related, they can be intrinsically related, or they can be causally related. So for example, the self and the aggregates are related. They're related intrinsically. And because they are related intrinsically, when I put my hand on the table, then I can say my hand is touching the table, right? So when I put a hand, this body, the hand of the body, when it is placed on the table, because the self and the body are intrinsically related, I can say, I have put the hand on the table, or my hand has touched the table. So I can say that because there is a relation between the body and the self. They're intrinsically related. But then going back to what the Nyayika say, they say that there is a permanent self. And actions of that self bring about a certain production and so forth. So here Shantideva says it is not possible because they have no relationship to the self. If the self is permanent, how can those actions be related to it?
Dindi keba yorwas pena nge chokze di juba in sayada nge lakpe chokze la regba in juba in sayni tsigdil keba yore.
Yeah.
Dindros ta lakpe chokze la regba na nge chokze la regba in sayadi nganzu ranglu la di lab chogoras. Ta dak takban dingin digi ani di lab chogo maris labsa yo maris kansin lakpa dang ani ngani boddi ndeme tönje chawanza labsa yo maris ra.
So we can say in our school of thought, we can say, my hand touched the table. And I can also say, I touched the table. Both of these statements are logical in our tradition, right? I touched the table, or yeah, I touched the table, or my hand touched the table. The Niyayikas cannot say that because they assert a self that is permanent and it is unrelated, for example, to the body and such. Since they're unrelated, they wouldn't be able to say that my hand touched the table, therefore I touched the table.
Denzata dadam pumbuni buddhi and jeme tunjin mangi digi and tunshingi pemba tunshin chesa dia lapsamandos rangi ngongi pemba che chesujimandos denza and da digi pemba chesuji zawani mebachik ra sungorwas.
So according to this school of thought, the Niyayikas, they assert a self and aggregates that are unrelated and all different meanings of different objects. So looking at the commentary again, it says, with respect to that, if one says that the action which creates the result of the self is of a different entity, then how does it become related to the self? The self and the action are not related. It could not be related as to the self by nature or cause.
There's somebody such a color.
Ila gyuma tawo insang kondro miri pares.
There is someone draw kung trubata shiva chene chua mirik banes. Taji Nanzugi Lunga Yisumgi, Chawa Chetangi, Pigi Kasota Ngung La Pa Chebaina, Tapet Yumata, Trupatavich, Mammy Shiva Tavich, Chadado, Tinza, any Kondro Sasagi, you di in Sajik, you dini, Trubajik, Zawanini, Yomaris, Tinza Kondro Sajimados, Ra, Kondro Sasagi, you Koran Winnie, Trubajik, they are Kondro Sasajimena, and Kondro San Miriwa Chagdos, Ra.
The third point in refuting the existence of independent causes says that once one understands all migrators to be like emanations, they see that it is unreasonable to be furious with them. So if you see migrators, if you see harm and so forth, there's existing like emanations, like apparitions, not existing objectively. You come to see that anger is not justified. It is unreasonable to become angry. In that, if you think of the object of anger, if there is nothing that you can find that exists objectively, there is no objectively existent object of anger, then there's nothing that you get angry with.
Di Jidangi Anzuda, Yulding ni Trubachik, Ra, Yukorang ni Trubachik, Zawani ni Yomaras, Tajik, and Nelu Lonja Kantajing by Naya, and Big Tobe Pata Zanjimodo, Yukoring ni Trubachik, Yomares. 다 콩주 삼미리 칼두야 균센 쪼디 아니 사사기 율디 유딩 트버치 매바인자 콩주 삼미리 과지 숭구도아스 라 숭구도아스 라
All phenomena do not exist from their own side. They do not exist in and of themselves. They exist only as being merely imputed one-sidedly or outwardly. That being the case, then when you look at how anger operates, it arises with respect to phenomena which are conceived as if they exist objectively. But since there is no objective existence, things do not exist objectively. Also, object of anger does not exist, and therefore there's nothing that you get angry with.
다디자 다디바라레 안간도 도롱로지 제바이나로 다 베나간도 닌지 기요라스 로 닌지 예버디 기고거라스 닌지 계사기 율 아니지 비 동아 용댕기 아니 간자 유팅 코란네 트바치 요르베스 안 디메바이나 디 요바이나네 디마소스 다 디메바이나네 아나 닌지 기 메리바르베스 다 디디게
However, this position can still give rise to some doubts and qualms in our mind. Like, for example, if objects do not exist in and of themselves, they don't exist objectively, how about those objects that we take for the cultivation of compassion? You can just as well say that if there is the object of compassion, suffering sentient beings, do not exist subjectively, and therefore you cannot find them. It is not logical to cultivate compassion. You can take up a debate in this way. So if you don't know how to take up this debate in the correct manner, in the right way, you might end up in contradictions and some misunderstanding.
율디 디우냠비기 율지레미니 디페 아니 유딘 트버타버치레얀 진치니 디네소 냠비기 로디기 토니 아니 시치니 콘르기기요레스 라 디인자 아니 케랑기 콘르 케랑 끼사기 지코랑기 따수 노르도스 따수 코랑 노르산도스 라 디인자 케랑 기리기도스 디강 조고라스 라.
So how do we reconcile that? Well, we reconcile that in looking at the way in which anger arises. It arises due to a certain motivation that is involved with a certain determination that we make. So we say, we make such determination as this or that. And we make such determination of this or that with respect to, for example, the object of anger. And it begins with coming up with this determination that it exists objectively. The thing that exists objectively is harming me. And that objectively existing source of harm is what we get angry with, which means that from the very get-go, our way of viewing that object is erroneous, is false.
Dirda ninji kitsuldi ninji kolongdi dangzing chigyo mares ro chigni dangzing chigyo mares nini bena ombun numbu gi ninji kitsulgi pande dawata bita omonjugi shongla jarwana yanda shinzong pundan de tendam nambang ngini ninji kun kinesus 당부 양답에 따와서 되니 닌지 기와디 닌지 기술디 ombu numbi lugre sejoras digalan drogoras that digalan drosuch digalan drogores.
Now, the way of cultivating compassion is not like that. So compassion is not generated from the outset by grasping at the self, which is what Chandrakirti referred to when he made a statement with respect to the way that sharp faculties practitioners generate compassion. Chandrakirti said in his supplement that those practitioners of sharp faculties first off generate the view, the correct view, and then they generate compassion.
간스나 토마디 먼저 즉 담아봐 심제 탐지 마리비기 샤완디 교체 아니 차당기 디왕기 레사니 동한 용되게 여바디 동한 용구 여바디 아니 원숨 우유 차고라스 라 텔미니 아니 닌지기기 여레스 딘자 양답이 따와지 촐투바이나 당부 양답이 따와 아니 최남지 내림 또투바이나 아니 심지 마리비 인 샤원디 큐리어바디 아니 세우슈치 또투거레스 다 디왕기 아니 차단기 디왕기 레사 레 메기와사 메기 또기 드벤 종구 여바디 아니 균제 땡종 름바디 아니 디 갈서걸 뇽도 메바지라스트라.
And this is what Chandrakirti referred to in his supplement to the middle way. So it says that we as ordinary beings, we are affected by suffering because of common afflictions. And when we look at our experience of suffering and the way that suffering arises, we can see the truth, the reality that Chandrakirti explained in how under the control of common afflictions, we experience suffering. So we generate compassion to ordinary beings that undergo the process by which, under the control of common afflictions, they end up experiencing suffering. So that is facilitated through the development of the correct view of reality. So when one generates the correct view, when they clearly see the way that phenomena exist, they also clearly see how sentient beings are controlled by an erroneous apprehension of the self. And because of the erroneous apprehension of the self, afflictions arise. Afflictions cause them to perform actions that result in suffering. So the arisal of suffering comes through a cause and effect process that is facilitated by an incorrect view of reality. So those sentient beings which are controlled by an incorrect view of reality, those sentient beings are the object of compassion. This is what Chandrakirti means or meant in his supplement to the middle way.
Tenda dinigi chik nenga di zawni ne dragme chik sort tubaina ani the genzin chemu dosra.
So when you see that these 2 points, which means anger, the cultivation of anger and the cultivation of compassion, are not alike, you draw a great meaning, great significance from that.
Diri dinza penanganzu chitangi chetamje ani rang tsingi matubari ani ranguni matubari tobe taksam res ani res ra inaya takazi jawrun sona jingi namje number dungi chenda mani watsam toba dige ani pena dame toba la yan drume wati dame tobi lodi chedan namje number dungi chenda mani wati dame ba dribigi ribala yan drugores in a tetsam gutoma to karsina ani yudin ni truba chonse ya meja tanyin du chaji gi namja tebi ani tebadi tobi lodi jengo do asra dame ba tobi lo singi din jen tubachi din jen tubaji yana ani dame bi jendi manor wachi ton tuyo asares demado jian meba do chikleya ani lo leso baina 되니 아니 천달 농약 가지 여러분 수 되나지 천달 농약이 님같이 차고 그래서 탄인기 자지 탄인도 아니 비기 내도 용보 임바다 아니 레 소보부 임바치 레 소보부 남자 태바디 아니 된덤도 매진 탄인도 예비 군조 참이 남자디 아니 조시비 로키투바치 다음에가 또 로라야 네버도 된지지 고고서레스로
No phenomena exists from its own side. No phenomena exists by way of its own characteristics. Phenomena are merely imputed by conceptions. This is what we said, right? And this is also what is honest referred to in the teaching that he recently gave, where he spoke about the mere not finding of the imputed object using the sevenfold rational analysis should think that it is insufficient to realize selflessness. So then, thinking about it, we do say that the sevenfold rational analysis in which the imputed object cannot be found is a reason that you use for determining determining selflessness. Like, for example, when you consider the selflessness of person. So not being able to find the person using the sevenfold rational analysis is a process that we use in order to determine the selflessness of person. But isn't it enough just to use the sevenfold rational analysis in order to determine the selflessness of person? It is not, because also that needs to then bring forward also the ability to posit that conventionally a presentation of an agent, function, an object is still tenable. So if you just suffice with the imputed object is not found when it is sought for using the sevenfold rational analysis, and you don't use that in order to then induce that ascertainment that conventionally a person, still an agent, still functions. If you don't bring that, then you might end up holding a nihilistic view that nothing whatsoever exists. So a sufferer, in a sense that a person who suffers still exists, the agent still exists, the object conventionally exists. So we still need to then be able to posit the conventional existence of object, agent, functionality, and so forth. They are facilitated by the ability to posit them is facilitated by the ascertainment of selflessness.
And 남중한 주기에 동된종 님보디 찍라 찍적친 열세디 율코랑 찬이 율짬기 찬 시위어 말아서 율짬기 찬 시위어나 텔레야 펜도 슈지 내가 슈지 책 말아서 유진 토라야 용고거스 펜도 동버도 로당 된종 도부 로니보디 조 찍적 찍라야 줘야디 유진래야 로고다스라 유진 토니 동버도 로기 된종 도부 로라야 초스죠 된종 도부 로이 동버도 로라야 초스 줘야지 레투바이나 되니 다 조드 셈을 요하다야디 디 토니 라 니모버 자마소야디 아니 로디니 찍조 찍을 때니 아니 땅간주 주기 아니 니모 도숨 정은 조드 디차고레스라
We often speak of empty and dependent arising, right? Emptiness, dependent arising. So these two are mutually supportive. They mutually assist each other. We say that, right? But that needs to apply not only to objects, but also to subjects. Object and subject also mutually supporting. They mutually assist each other. So, for example, so in relation to a subject that ascertains emptiness should assist the subject that ascertains dependent arising. And a subject that realizes dependent arising should be supportive of the subject that realizes emptiness. In that way, they are mutually supportive, mutually assist each other. So if you get that, you can use that in order to transform your mind, to cleanse afflictive states of mind. That ascertainment of the mutual support of emptiness and dependent arising is what will destroy our afflictive states of mind, anger, attachment, and so forth.
Yeah.
So, are you saying
Yes.
yes? That's a short question.
Are
So,
you sure?
are you saying that the subkas and the yalkas or
Nyayikas, the Samkhya's and the Nyayikas, yeah.
the stump oils and the so are you saying that they only perceive conventional reality as opposed to us who have the two truths of ultimate reality and conventional reality?
All right. So I'm just going to repeat the question for the people at home. So I was saying that the Nyayikas and the Samkhya's only perceive conventional reality. They do not perceive ultimate reality. So we posit those two realities, ultimate and conventional realities. I would say that they only conceive of conventional realities. Dila Chesandila Chanchemba tan Rikpa Chen Sasto, Chesandi look di Nila Tanyegi Demba Mato, Tuntan Demba, Toema Res, Nazo Lula, Tuntan Demba, Tan Kunzo Demba, Niga Toyo Res, Kunzo Lula, Halam Kunzo Demba, Tanyegi Demba Mato, Shatugi Madbes.
Today in Baras, right? That Tanying Dembatian, Tanying Namja, P. Bin Yunji, Injung Namja Yawish, Tian Shao to your Maras, right?
Well, we would say that to a certain extent, in that we would say that in our, according to our school of thought, we posit the two truths, conventional and ultimate truth. Now, with respect to the Nyayikas and the Samkhyas, we can say that they posit or conceive of conventional truths. But then when you look at the way that they conceive that or posit that, like, for example, karma, the way that actions produce their effects, do they posit that in the correct manner? Now, these are conventional realities, or conventional truths. Do they posit that in the correct manner? Geshe is not sure.
Tadema to Log Shagindra, Tedder Tamji Shingiwan, Tiwangi, Tamame, Tedder Shini, Truth Davi, Mobokola Tromingers.
But the point that Geshe made with respect to emanations and so forth is related to verse 31. So it comes under the heading of once one understands all my greaters to be like emanations, to see that it is unreasonable to be furious with them. We haven't read through the verse, let's do that. It says, hence, all are governed by others, and through the power of that, they have no power. Having understood in this way, I shall not become angry at all things that are like emanations.
That Revenue Sewers, the third Rebu Gibi, Chava Tamji Shingiwan Jinginas. Ken Tenam Yang, Gugan Hamang Hama, Tiwangi Chongwe, Jebun Te Jong Munjongi, Wang Meba, Gumata, Trubatawo. Mobotamji Ranshingi Tribi, Tonshin, Chava Cheva, Tetter Shini, Trubatavi, Mobokola, Tro Mingure, Numugi Sabin Jimbi, Tenjong Ranjim Meba Tovala, Labar Chavos.
The commentary reads, thus all actions that produce a result are other powered. And these conditions are again powered by earlier causes and conditions. Therefore, the result does not have any saying whether it rises or not, and hence it is like an illusion or emanation. When one understands that all functionalities perform actions while being empty of existence from the onside, one does not become angry at these emanation-like functionalities. Therefore, one should train in realizing the dependent arising, that is, the lack of existence from its onside, which destroys the seed of the afflictions.
That Yazurumchi, the Mubutanji Ranshin tribute Tonshin, the Chajet Heba, Tedershin is, Tedershin, Trubata, City, the Tautatulaya, Janandos, the dear young chokers, Kansana, Kunjugish, any Kenzu de dancing chigurs, Tanjishivanaji, Kunduza did Chaganza, and then John Ranjim about Tumal Ten, dancing Jongri, dancing John Wondi, Zawa dancing John Wondi, Yaga Chadan la Sobadi, and Shia Yimba was raw. Inaya, the Zawa Korangi. Songi, Tsiki, and Carso, Dachijamba, Tena, and Shawana imbati, Shawana imbat, Tedershini, and Mubatam Jipe, Trobata Chiondi, and Kamevachik, Kuking Dogi, and Rameva Tree Gunza, and Kapkalaya, Susulaya, and never the Chunayana, and Pigilaya, Rameva, and Tromizi watching, and Kondriki Mugu watching, but Dindije and Sunguyas race raw.
When Geshe Rinpoche says, when one understands that all functionalities perform actions while being empty of existence from the onside, one does not become angry at these emanations like functionalities. He explains the last two lines in verse 31 that say, having understood this, do not become angry at emanations like phenomena. He explains that from the viewpoint of the ultimate, from the viewpoint of emptiness. But you can also think, you can also think about it in the following way. Well, anger is conditioned by grasping at the self. This is the main condition for anger. If you realize the realization, if you develop the realization of emptiness, you can use that in order to destroy grasping at the self. And if you destroy grasping at the self, the branches of grasping at the self, the things that stem out from that, anger and the like, will also come to be destroyed. But then on top of that, when you look at the wordings of verse 31, you can say, having understood this, which means that having understood that these functionalities are other powered, which means that they're governed by other things. When you understand that these functionalities are governed by other things, you understand that even when you're harmed, it cannot be helped. It cannot be helped because it's not that they do it in having a sense of control, they're governed, they're powered by other things. So understanding that they're powered by other things, that are other powered, as it says here, all actions that produce results are other powered. So when you understand that those functionalities are other powered, you understand that in certain situations, harm cannot be helped. And therefore, there is no point of getting angry.
Yeah, Jesus.
Yeah. So Jesus has transformed to Guru Rinpoche. Jesus, sorry, Guru.
What exists of things? Is there anything that exists of things other than what is experienced by beings, or what appears to awareness?
So is there anything that exists in things other than what is experienced by beings or seen by awareness? Appears to awareness. Dila semla nangwa yamena kansa di nyawa le shemba yoba dente chi sha yorves
컨디션
취지 여바이나로와
취직 여바이나
여바이나 그래서 셈람 마낭에 야마나 칸산 마녀나 근데 여바 저 여러베 여마레스
샘라만 취직 이완스라 아 샘라만은 취직자는 유단 유전의 데미비기 율직 샤고로 왔어 디오마로스라
well you cannot posit any phenomenon that doesn't appear to consciousness because if you say that there is a certain phenomenon that exists and it doesn't appear to awareness, you're breaking the link between object and subject, in that an object can exist without a subject, and that is not possible.
And so there is nothing that exists other than what appears to awareness.
So there's nothing that exists other than appearing to an awareness.
Or appearances to awareness. Appearances to awareness.
Appearing to?
Appearances to awareness.
Appearance to awarenesses. Chezandi Lola Nawama to Shane Dendi Yowa Jatui Marvis.
자투 마스 먼저 루라요 지지스 루라요 나가서
Yeah, this is what we assert in our system. Geshe doesn't know if you assert that in the system of Jesus. Sorry?
Is that a yes or no?
no 가서
Chezandi, just a second. Chezandi, Semna Nawama to the Yoba Chatugi Marwas.
자투 마스라
Yeah, you cannot say that something exists other than being appearance, rather than appearing to a consciousness, or appearance to a consciousness.
So forms are, I thought that appearances are non-associated concepts. So then form is an appearance to awareness.
Chezan kanyo badi semla nawa den chik shayarwa.
제
Ine nawa se di temin duje peshe shagiresa. Ina zuk se di semla nawa chik shawarina. Ta zuk se di zukro susurunwa. Temin duje marwas.
들이 라고 말했어. 단데 그냥 딩히라로 딩히라 찍라고 해야지네. 안데 제무제운데 지지스 저라고라. 곧 지지스 꽈드로지 콜딜라고 뭐도 지단 지지스 라고 말했어라. 인디 켄자였을 상자.
Before we answer, Geshe gives you an answer for that. He just wants to kind of make sure that we understand that we do not mock or make joke on Jesus in general. It's just that you look a little bit like Jesus. So Geshe is pulling your leg. It's not a joke about Jesus himself.
대리 단데 그냥기 나와 데면 두지레서디 피기 로이기 진단 열당 나유 셴윤 주기세기 디 치비기 나율때에 셰데 거라스 지단 그냥기 추칸라지나야 샘라 만나바 아니 추지 열어서 딩이 로가레다스
Yeah, and it should some kasi semla manane chushe yomarese di chu semla namarese chi.
샘을 찾고 그랬어 그래서 딜라고라다
So it's about the way that you state it, and if you want to state it sometimes in a strict debate format, then sometimes kind of the way that you say it in English and Tibetan are not completely compatible. But let's try to work with what we have. So if you say that all phenomena are appearances to an awareness, and then you say that but appearance is a non-associated. Appearance is non-associated compositional factor, and then you start to investigate appearance in terms of there are different ways of classifying an object. So there is the object of the mode of apprehension, the apprehended object, the appearing object, and so forth. So here, when you say that all phenomena are appearances to a mind, it is different to say that all appearances are therefore, all phenomena therefore are become appearing objects. Right? So it depends upon the way that you would formulate it. Anyway, thank you. Let's leave it here for now. Yududa lama sangye dugine doa chikama lupa de salaka pasho. Rinpoche make pana kegyochi kyawanya pamewa gole kondo tawasho. Kowe shinkande Malun jungene chebe sewa tense gansoye shape singe padu tenkyuchi Sondu jube lam seje sante kanji tenkyungo Chana pemo tense ganso So one dem so chen ruru sho Jamgun Gawe Den Sekyong Pewe Kunzo Dohozi Chosun Kowe Lemon Turu Dazo Doji Kundu Shanten Chu.
How's you? Tom, good.
Yaklaşık
네. 준비하면
탐보디 멤베 이제 많이 선명화 내가 이거 그래서 야홀 그래서 그래서 캐디
테스트링에서 나오죠.
맞어.
Yeah.